On a chilly Saturday morning in October 1978, the parking lot behind Ridgeway Mall felt like any other suburban weekend. Ritual families unloading groceries, teenagers leaning on car hoods, the distant hum of leaf blowers drifting from the neighborhood beyond. A folding table sat near the entrance, manned by two smiling volunteers in green windbreakers, their hands moving in a practiced rhythm as they handed out small boxed home weather monitors free, courtesy of Aurora Environmental Research. Most shoppers took them gratefully, pleased by the idea of a free gadget, charmed by the simple analog dial promising indoor humidity and temperature readings. It felt like the kind of harmless promotional item America had gotten used to: free Tupperware, free stickers, free calculators, nothing extraordinary. But standing a few feet away, FCC technician Mark Ellison watched the scene with a faint unease he couldn't name. He wasn't there on duty. He had stopped by to pick up windshield wipers and a pack of batteries. Yet the moment he saw the boxes stacked neatly in a pyramid, something in him tightened, a vague recognition he couldn't place. He stepped closer, pretending to examine the display, and for a moment the morning sunlight cut across one of the devices in a way that revealed a hairline seam along the back panel, too precise for mass-market injection molding. He filed it away as nothing. He wanted it to be nothing, but the detail dug into his thoughts like a splinter. A volunteer noticed his stare. "Go on. Take one," she said cheerfully. "It's totally free. We're doing environmental awareness outreach this month." Outreach. Mark nodded politely and walked off without accepting one. It was the word environmental that bothered him, a vague umbrella term, often used by small non-profit outfits, never by established research institutes, and certainly not by Aurora Environmental Research, a name he'd never heard until today. He chalked it up to paranoia. His job exposed him continually to radio interference, unusual transmissions, unpredictable electromagnetic noise. After a while, the mind began looking for patterns, even where they didn't exist. Still, as he reached his car, he glanced back. A father lifted a weather monitor out of its packaging, smiling as his young son twisted the dials. Another shopper tucked one into her purse. A cashier taped one to the side of her register with a laugh. They were multiplying, spreading into homes, kitchens, bedrooms as easily as coupons. He started the engine, trying to shake the feeling. His radio crackled just once, a soft, stuttering whip of static across a frequency that shouldn't have been active on a Saturday morning. It lasted less than half a second, so brief he almost dismissed it. Almost. Static is never random. Not in his world. Mark leaned closer, adjusting the tuner with the delicate precision of someone trained to hear what others ignored. No repeat, no anomaly. The band went silent again. A clean silence that felt too clean. Manufactured, his pulse thudded quietly. He told himself it was nothing, that he was overreacting to a promotional giveaway that thousands of Americans would pick up without a second thought. Yet as he backed out of his parking space, he saw a man in a tan coat, someone who hadn't taken a free device, standing completely still, watching the crowd with eyes that didn't match the easy smiles around him. The man wasn't observing the shoppers. He was observing where the devices were going. Mark blinked. But the man slipped into the crowd and disappeared between parked cars, leaving behind the faintest tremor of suspicion in the morning air. Later, much later, Mark would look back at this ordinary Saturday as the moment everything began to unravel. The moment a harmless giveaway revealed the first hairline fracture in a Soviet operation that had grown far too large, far too confident, far too invisible. And the moment he realized the static on his radio wasn't interference, it was a greeting. By Monday morning, the free weather monitors had already woven themselves into the background fabric of suburban life. They sat on kitchen counters beside jars of sugar, on teachers' desks next to stacks of graded papers, on garage shelves, humming quietly among paint cans and socket wrenches. No one questioned them. Why would they? America trusted anything that arrived with a smile and a logo printed in soft blue ink. Mark Ellison, however, carried the unease from Saturday like a persistent shadow. When he stepped into the FCC regional office in Arlington, the familiar hum of fluorescent lights did nothing to settle him. He took his place at his console, running routine spectrum scans for unauthorized transmissions, pirate radio stations, malfunctioning equipment, nervous hobbyists, transmitting on restricted channels. It was supposed to be a slow morning, but then he saw it. A thin spike on a frequency too low for commercial devices, too high for ham radio, and too clean to be accidental. A narrow-band whisper, pulsing at perfectly timed intervals 4 seconds apart like a heartbeat. He expanded the graph. The pulse repeated. 4 seconds. 4 seconds. 4 seconds. Not continuous, not random, not noise, a metronome. He logged the anomaly, tagged it as pending review, and leaned back, waiting for a second spike that never came. The transmission ceased as abruptly as it had appeared, leaving the screen flat and innocent, as though mocking him for noticing. A co-worker, Janet, rolled her chair over. "You look like you saw a ghost," she said. "Just interference," he replied. But even he didn't believe it. At lunch, he drove to Ridgeway Mall, not for food, but for confirmation. The folding table was gone, replaced by a Halloween display. No volunteers, no green windbreakers, no boxes. As if the giveaway had never existed. He entered the bookstore, scanning the shelves, not for literature, but for people. Normal shoppers, normal chatter. Nothing wrong. Yet Mark's pulse stayed tight, tuned to the memory of the man in the tan coat. As he walked back toward the exit, he saw something that made him freeze mid-step. The janitor's closet door stood ajar, and inside, barely visible, was a cardboard box identical to the giveaway packaging. He approached slowly. Inside the box were 5 weather monitors, all unclaimed. Their back panels were removed, tiny circuits exposed like surgical incisions. Someone had been working on them, modifying them, or repairing them, or checking whether they had functioned. A metallic clatter behind him made him spin. The mall janitor stood there, mop in hand, eyes narrowing. "You looking for something?" the man asked. Mark forced a friendly tone. "Thought it was a lost and found box." The janitor stared too long, too hard, before shrugging. "They told me to toss those. Some promo group forgot to pick 'em up." "Which group?" "Dunno. They were gone before my shift even started." In the founds, Mark thanked him and left. The mall's air felt suddenly heavy, as if saturated with signals he couldn't hear. By 3 p.m., the FCC anomaly reappeared. Another pulse, 4 seconds, then another, then another. But this time, the computer triangulated a faint directional signature, narrowing the source to a zone spanning only a few city blocks. And right in the center of that zone sat Ridgeway Mall. Mark's chest tightened. Something was broadcasting. Something distributed. Something small. And then a chilling thought clawed its way into his mind. What if every weather monitor was actually part of a network? A mesh of silent nodes? Listening, waiting, reporting. He stared at the screen, pulse hammering. The free giveaway wasn't a mistake. It was infrastructure. By Wednesday afternoon, the pulse had evolved. What had once been a 4-second metronome now shifted unpredictably 3 seconds, then 5. Then back to 4, as if responding to something alive in the environment. Mark watched the graph redraw itself in jagged bursts. Each spike tall and deliberate, too controlled to be natural interference. Someone was testing the network. Someone was listening for a reply. He isolated the signal again. Same narrowband signature. Same faint, harmonic wobble. But now an additional detail surfaced so small that the FCC software didn't flag it automatically. A secondary ripple buried underneath the primary pulse, the subcarrier fluctuating with a microscopic irregularity. A pattern, not one meant for human ears. One meant to be decoded. He exported the raw data and ran it through an old Cold War-era spectral analysis tool the FCC rarely used. The output appeared as a string of numbers meaningless at first, until a realization slid over him like ice. The numbers weren't random. They were positional, grid coordinates, localized, domestic, all within a 5-mile radius of Ridgeway Mall. He zoomed further. Each coordinate corresponded to a cluster of homes, schools, offices, places where the giveaway devices had likely been taken. The weather monitors weren't monitoring weather. They were mapping human density and movement patterns, collecting metadata at scale, disguised under a civic ribbon. Mark felt the air thin around him. He drove home fast, his palms slick against the wheel. "Everything okay?" she asked. "I need the weather thing they gave out at the mall." She raised an eyebrow. "The little temperature box." "It's in the kitchen drawer somewhere." He rummaged through the cluttered drawer until he found it, deceptively cheerful in its plastic casing. He flipped it over. A screw held the battery panel in place. He removed it and froze. Under the battery tray was a second layer of circuitry, thinner than a coin, etched with symbols not used in American manufacturing. A micro-loop antenna, curved like a hair, 2 capacitors arranged in a pattern symmetrical enough to be intentional but unfamiliar. And in the center, a diode pulsing with a faint, barely visible red flicker. Heartbeat. "Mark?" Laura asked softly. "Why does that thing look wrong?" He didn't answer. The diode flashed brighter. On, off, on, off. A silent beacon. He covered it with his palm. The light seeped through his fingers. "Laura," he whispered, "this thing is transmitting. With you ever. To who?" He didn't know. And that terrified him. He wrapped the device in aluminum foil, taped it tight, then stuffed it inside a metal mixing bowl to block any outgoing signal. His hands shook as he did it. He felt like he was suffocating inside someone else's experiment. That night, he returned to the FCC office after hours. Only the emergency exit lights were on, bathing the hallways in a sickly green glow. He plugged the weather monitor, still wrapped in a diagnostic cage. The pulse reappeared instantly on the spectrum monitor, but now something new emerged in the waveform. A whispering modulation layered beneath the carrier, almost imperceptible like breath caught on a microphone. When Mark amplified it, static filled the speakers. Then a ghost-like resonance swept through the room. Rhythmic, mechanical, almost phonetic. A shiver crawled across his scalp. It wasn't weather data. It wasn't telemetry. It was speech, compressed beyond recognition, encrypted in the carrier wave. And it was coming from hundreds of identical devices across the city. Mark leaned back in his chair. The KGB hadn't smuggled in a listening device. They had smuggled in a listening network, a city-wide web of domestic nodes, low power, low profile, low risk, designed to vacuum up the most valuable thing in the Cold War. Patterns, routines, predictability, the data that tells you how a nation breathes. Mark whispered into the empty room. "Oh God, what did we let into our homes?" By Thursday morning, the anomaly had spread. Every FCC monitoring station within a 50-mile radius began reporting identical irregular pulses, same narrowband signature, same buried subcarrier, whispering beneath the carrier wave. The pattern wasn't expanding geographically. It was awakening in synchronized clusters, as if a master switch had been thrown somewhere far away, and the network was now humming at full operational capacity. Mark stood in the middle of the operations floor, staring at a map that looked less like a signal report and more like a constellation of infection points. Each red dot represented a weather monitor. Each cluster formed a geometric grid, too ordered, too deliberate to be coincidence. One of the younger techs approached, holding a printout. "Sir, we found this," as the report showed that several devices had registered pressure fluctuations, microscopic shifts that didn't correlate with temperature or humidity changes. At first, the numbers made no sense, until Mark saw the variance align into a rising and falling pattern. Breathing. Human breathing. They were mapping occupancy in real time. Not names. Not faces. But presence. The holy grail of surveillance. Human density mapping without microphones or cameras. With enough nodes, you could read the rhythm of a town, when people woke, when they left, when they returned, when an entire neighborhood was asleep, and if you were patient, you could find patterns inside those patterns. Routine. Security habits. Weaknesses. Mark's stomach tightened. This was no longer a technical anomaly. This was operational tradecraft. Someone had tested the system quietly for weeks. Now, they were collecting. He marched into the director's office without knocking. Director Hollings sat behind his desk, feet planted wide, posture rigid. "We need DHS, CIA, Army signals command everyone." Hollings gave a tired exhale. "We already made the calls." Mark blinked. "Already? When?" "7 this morning." The Pentagon picked up the same signature, bouncing off a satellite relay. Whatever this thing is, it's not just local. A chill ran through Mark's spine. He had been thinking too small. A knock interrupted them. An agent from Army Signals stepped in, clutching a thick envelope. "We completed the teardown of the device Mr. Carter brought in," the agent said. They spread the photographs across Hollings's desk. Inside each harmless plastic casing was a wafer-thin crystal oscillator Cold War era. Soviet-manufactured, but modified with modern components. The circuitry wasn't crude. It wasn't outdated. It was elegant, purpose-built, an evolution of technology the U.S. had only seen hints of in captured equipment. Then the agent pointed to a symbol etched microscopic on the microloop antenna, a tiny triangle intersected by a vertical bar. Mark felt the room still around him. He had seen that symbol once before, in a briefing about dormant Soviet programs believed to have been shuttered decades ago. Director. Hollings stiffened. "No." Mark shook his head slowly. "This is Directorate S." The room went silent. Directorate S was the elite of the elite, the deep cover unit specializing in illegal intelligence networks, long-term sleeper infiltration, and unconventional collection methods. The kind of operatives who didn't just spy on a country. They embedded themselves into it. If Directorate S had engineered this giveaway, the operation was not only active, it had been prepared for years, maybe decades. Before the weight of that realization could settle, a console behind them beeped urgently. One of the analysts shouted, "Sir, new spike! The devices are syncing!" Mark and Hollings rushed to the monitoring screens. The scattered pulses across the map started blinking in unison. Each node aligning into perfect, rhythmic harmony, as if the network had just received a new command. Then the waves merged. Not individual pulses anymore. One continuous, rising frequency. A system, coming fully online. Mark leaned closer, his voice cracking. "They're not collecting data now." Hollings swallowed. "They're transmitting back." The moment the transmission unified, the entire operations floor shifted from tense concentration to something closer to fear. Quiet, disciplined, suffocating fear. screens recalibrated. Analysts dragged sliders across spectrograms, printers hammered out page after page of signal deltas. But it was the new waveform itself, smooth, ascending, coherent, that made Mark feel as if the air had turned electric. "Direction?" he asked. "Working on it." A technician replied, voice cracking. "But sir, it's not a point source transmission." Mark frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," she whispered, "they're using every device as an uplink node. The network itself has become the transmitter. Mesh relay. Self-sustaining. Impossible to jam without shutting down tens of thousands of consumer devices simultaneously." Mark rubbed his temple. "What are they sending?" No one answered, because the room froze as another line of data appeared on screen, one that none of them expected. Not environmental metrics, not coordinates, not raw acoustic signatures. Behavioral pattern clusters. The system had been building predictive behavioral models of American households. Wake cycles, occupancy fluctuation, absence windows, travel habits, consistent routes, factors. Intelligence agencies typically needed months of surveillance to build. Director Hollings exhaled sharply. This is targeting data. But targeting for what?" someone asked. Before Hollings could respond, another alert flashed. "Sir, look at this. The system is distinguishing between single occupancy and multi-occupancy homes. It's flagging houses with consistent nighttime absence windows." Mark felt the chills slide down his spine. Nighttime absence windows meant one thing: homes where adults worked late or worked nights. The perfect pattern for infiltrations, or abductions, or covert asset retrieval. But the next data block was worse, much worse. "Sir," the same technician murmured, "it's prioritizing locations with federal commuter patterns." Mark stiffened. "Define federal commuter patterns," she swallowed. "Homes where one or more residents regularly traveled to the Pentagon, NSA, State Department, NIH, NIST, anyone with a badge tied to national infrastructure." Hollings' jaw tightened. "They weren't mapping civilians, Oakham." Mark finished the sentence for him. "They were mapping us." The room fell into a suffocating silence. Then the duty officer sprinted in from the hallway. Clutching a tablet, "We pulled the metadata from the original production batch," he said. "The giveaway wasn't random. Stores participating in the promotion were clustered specifically around federal commuting corridors: Maryland, Northern Virginia, suburban D.C. Hollings stared at him. "Deliberate placement?" "Yes, sir. Coordinated. Years in the making. Years. Not weeks. Not months." The realization hit Mark like a blow. This wasn't a quick espionage stunt. This was an embedded operation waiting for activation. And tonight was activation. Before anyone could process that, the overhead lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. The floor went dead quiet. Mark turned to the nearest console. "What was that?" The analyst looked up slowly. "That wasn't us." A second flicker. Then the emergency lighting hummed to life. Not enough to suggest a full outage, but enough to say the grid had been touched. Director Hollings barked. "Is the building compromised?" "No," someone answered. But the same flicker just hit Fort Meade, and Quantico, and Arlington, all at the exact same moment. A synchronized grid dip. A probing action. Testing response times. Testing redundancies. Testing defenses. Mark's breath shook. They're using the devices as a distributed sensor net to map how quickly our infrastructure reacts. Hollings spoke in a quiet, horrified whisper. "Jesus Christ, they're rehearsing." Another alert exploded across the screens. Every device, every node, every fake weather monitor transmitting again. Only now, the output was shorter, sharper, encoded differently. A directive. Someone behind Mark said, what no one else dared to say aloud. This isn't collection anymore. In the muthus, Mark closed his eyes. It's phase 2. The directive burst across the screens before anyone could interpret it. A compressed plume of encrypted syllables, packed so tightly the system struggled to render them. The waveform wasn't a message, it was a trigger. Something small, sharp, precise. A spark meant to ignite 100 hidden fuses at once. Mark stepped closer, his hands slightly trembling over the console. Decode priority Sigma. Now, we're trying, a cryptographer murmured. But the structure's wrong. It's not like anything we've seen since the analog cipher era. Meaning what? Meaning it's not meant for machines to understand. A beat. It's meant for people. On another monitor, dozens of devices, thermostats, clocks, kitchen radios, children's nightlights, shifted from passive relay nodes to active ones, blinking in staggering synchronicity. Homes across the map flickered in patterns that were too symmetrical to be random. Director Hollings leaned forward, eyes narrowing. That's not signaling behavior. That's activation behavior. A hush fell over the operations floor, swift, heavy, suffocating. Mark steadied his breathing. Activation for what? Before anyone could answer, a new feed popped open. Live traffic cameras across suburban corridors. People stepped out of their homes. Not many, just a handful, each of them pausing briefly, looking at porch lights, at small devices, at blinking kitchen clocks through windows. Ordinary Americans. Or so the census would say, Hollings murmured. They're checking for cues. Mark felt his stomach hollow out. You think they planted sleepers? Not sleepers, couriers. Hollings' voice dropped another register. The kind who don't even know they're couriers. Offerman. Meanwhile, the modified giveaway device, the innocent little consumer gadget, was still pulsing with hidden frequencies. A technician pushed in another log. Sir, the directive includes a scramble pattern. It overwrites internal memory segments. Overwrites with what? We don't know. But the devices aren't simply transmitting anymore. They're changing. Mark forced himself to focus. Could it be making them into emulators? Acting as micro-repeaters? As proximity keys? The technician hesitated. Or as detonation primes? Silence. Full, absolute silence. Then Hollings snapped back into motion. Pull up everything involving the Soviets' Cold War contingency protocols. Dead hand systems, proxy activation, shadow networks, everything. Files shot across the screens, projects once classified so deeply they might as well have been myths. Operation Vostok, the Lavrentiev relay model. The long-rumored MIR-7 domestic disruption frameworks. And one term that made Mark's blood run cold. Sputnik B classification. Guide key systems. A system not meant to attack, but to guide something already en route. Mark inhaled slowly. They're not mapping targets for infiltration. He pointed at the behavioral clusters. They're mapping response vulnerabilities. Hollings turned. For what purpose? Mark hesitated. Because the truth felt too absurd and too plausible. For missiles that aren't meant to strike cities, but to strike infrastructure rings first. Power, comms, federal nodes. A single surgical blackout, perfectly timed, perfectly placed, could blind America for minutes, maybe hours. And in a nuclear exchange, hours were eternity. Before anyone could absorb that, another alert chimed. This one quieter, colder. A technician looked up, pale. Sir, one of the devices just transmitted a secondary signal. Not outward. Hollings frowned. Then, to where? To itself. Her voice cracked. It's self-arming. Mark leaned in. every muscle locked. Do we have a visual? A suburban kitchen feed appeared ordinary, warm, lived in, until the little giveaway device on the counter emitted a soft internal click, like a latch sliding into place. Not explosive, not yet, but unmistakably intentional. Mark whispered, "My God, it's creating synchronization across the network." Hollings whispered back, "If they all trigger at once." No one finished the sentence. Fog of war had collapsed. This wasn't surveillance anymore. This was preparation. The room vibrated with a tension so sharp it bordered on audible monitors flickering, analysts whispering to no one in particular, as though afraid the wrong syllable might set the whole network off. Mark stepped forward, eyes locked on the neat little kitchen device clicking into its second internal latch. A child's voice floated faintly from the live feed. Someone in that house was humming, unaware that history was tightening around their breakfast table like a tightening noose. Kill the devices. EMP nodes on standby. A technician shook his head, terrified. EMP won't work, sir. Not unless we detonate above regional altitude. Anything lower risks taking out our own grid, and the KGB built these with shielding. They'll survive partial pulses. So they planned for countermeasures. Hollings' jaw locked. They always do. Mark's voice emerged, small but steady. They wanted us to panic. They need synchronization, not destruction. These things aren't built to explode. They're built to signal something bigger. Hollings turned to him. Then what's the real target? Hail. Mark swallowed hard. The devices aren't weapons. They're calibration points. The room froze. Calibration for what? Someone asked. Mark pulled up the Soviet Gudki schematic, overlaying it on the live activation map. Triangulations. He exhaled sharply. They're building a correction grid for offshore guidance systems. A beat for submarine-launched payloads. You could feel the oxygen leave the room. If the grid finished calibrating, Soviet subs sitting hundreds of miles offshore could correct their ballistic arcs with terrifying precision, bypassing NORAD's early warning thresholds, slipping payloads into low-angle approaches. Stealth by mathematics. One small giveaway gadget at a time. A murmur swept the operations floor, something between horror and awe. Hollings straightened. So, we stop the grid. But Mark shook his head. We can't. Not by force. The system is decentralized. If we kill half the devices, the other half adjusts the lattice. They don't need all nodes, they just need enough. Hollings stared at the map. Then, we distort it. That single sentence cracked the paralysis in the room. Within seconds, Mark and two signal engineers tore into the network's architecture. They couldn't shut the nodes down, but they could make them lie. They could inject artificial offsets, falsified timing signatures, phantom drift readings, a digital funhouse mirror, subtle enough not to raise alarms, catastrophic enough to steer any KGB calculations into the void. Mark's hands flew across the keyboard, rewriting Soviet code in real time. He felt something strange rising in his chest, fear. Yes, but also clarity. The kind of clarity that comes only when you realize you're standing in the exact hinge moment of history. Injecting distortion now, he said quietly. The map shimmered. The synchronized pulses staggered. The lattice fractured. Angles skewed by mere millimeters. Millimeters that would redirect a future missile by 50 miles. Then 100, then 1,000. Across the ocean, Soviet officers would see a perfect calibration grid completing. In reality, it was poison. Elegant, invisible poison. The final activation clicked on the kitchen device, a soft, pathetic sound in the face of the machinery of nations. Then, everything went still. No detonation, no flash, no sirens. Just silence, vast, bottomless, waiting. After a long minute, a field agent approached Hollings with a single printed slip. "Satellite intercept confirms it," the agent said. Hollings nodded once. "That means if they ever launch, it'll miss," Mark said. The director allowed himself a breath, half relief, half something darker. "No one will ever know." Mark stared at the fading blips on the map. Each one, an American household that had unknowingly hosted a Cold War battle point. "And the people who got those giveaway devices?" he asked. Hollings shook his head. "They'll never know either. That's the point." Mark looked down at his own hands, steady now, but changed. He wasn't a buyer who spotted a defect in a cheap promotion anymore. He was a witness to how close the world had come to the brink without a single headline breaking the surface. The KGB had tried to turn American generosity into their biggest espionage triumph. Instead, it became their most elegant failure. And as the lights dimmed on the operations floor, Hollings said the quiet part that would never appear in any report. "America didn't win because we were stronger today. We won because we noticed what they thought we'd overlook." Outside, dawn was beginning. History had shifted by an inch, and the world would move forward, unaware that a free giveaway, something meant to charm consumers, had nearly rewritten the balance of global power. But not today. Today, America had outsmarted the KGB. Quietly, invisible, completely.